A people have passed this way, a whole people. And they've left the poles of their burial scaffolds to mark the trail where they've passed. Their story and the trail itself goes back 20,000 years. The people live on after a fashion, but the trail ended less than 100 years ago. Here, on the Great American Plains, in the country of the Absaraka, near the river called the Greasy Grass. By the 1870s, the telephone, the mimeograph, the steam turbine had all been invented. We Americans were smack in the middle of the machine age, worshiping the wheel, we said. But at the same moment, some Americans were still burying their dead in the sky. Not out of ignorance, but by deliberate choice, some of us were still living literally in the Stone Age. Which Stone Age American, wrapped in his sleeping robe, journeyed from here to the beyond country, to the camp of many lodges? No one knows. No one knows his name, nor how, nor when he died. All that is known is that he lived on horseback, and his home was all around him, here on the Great Plains. He had never mapped the land, nor knew that the geographers who had scornfully labeled it the Great American Desert called it a permanent barrier to civilization, so sterile the devil couldn't raise hell on it, save in very small clinkers, hospitable only to serpents and savages. But to the savage, his title was clear and indisputable. Whatever is cut by the feet of our ponies, that is our land. Whatever is slashed by our lodge poles, that is our sky. And that was all the land that lay between the Mississippi and the Rockies, between the Big River and the backbone of the world, and north from the Salt Fork of the Red River, across the Medicine Line into Canada, the grandmother's land. What the map called a desert was actually one enormous rippling blanket of grass. This was the Great Plains. Here on land, every square inch of which promised to be theirs forever, lived more than half of the Indians in North America. Here lived the Absaroki, the people of the Raven, called the Crow, the Blackfeet and the Assiniboine, the Stone Boilers, the Cree of the Black and Fence, and the Arikaras. Here lived the Crazy Knife people, the Kiowa, and the Osage of the Shaved Heads, and the Missouri of the Dugout Canoe. Here, too, were the people of the Puckered Moccasin, the Chippewa of the Plains, and the Wind River Shoshone, and the Comanche, called the Snake people, and the Pawnee, called the Wolf people. Here were the Sissetas, the Cut-Arm Cheyenne, and the Strong-Heart Arapaho, the people of the Blue Cloud. And around them all like a hoop, and darting through them all like an arrow, the Teton Dakota, the 7 tribes of the Sioux Nation. But the land was not theirs alone. It had been given them to share with the grasshopper and the black hawk and the great bull of the prairie. The earth belonged to all the things which lived on it, and the ghosts of all things which had lived on it. And there was an exaltation in them when they sang of their land. Here the 2-leggeds and the 4-leggeds lived together like relatives. All living things with feet and wings and roots are our children, and our thoughts rise high as the eagles do. The Indian prayed to the sky and the earth and the cardinal points. These were the 6 grandfathers, all natural forces, everything which existed. An accidental rock on the prairie, the wind's whisper. He was related to all things, and all things were related to the everywhere spirit. Above people listen, underwater people listen. Send a soft wind from the south, and let it warm the earth, and let it blow the coals of our cooking fires and warm our lodges, and let a good thing happen to our people. But the people, divided into 60 different tribes and separated by 7 different languages, had only one thing in common: a way of life. And one thing more, a pathetic belief that a brake of willows would hold back a wind which would blow from 4 directions at once. When the Indian first saw the 4-way wind, the whirlwind, He didn't know it because in the beginning it was just a wisp of smoke on the prairie. The red man had seen the white man before, of course, and had occasional friendly contact with traders and trappers. But he had seen so few of them, he was certain there were not very many. Now he was seeing more, and they were all in a hurry to reach the mountains. It was 1849, and each day on the prairie was one more day of poverty to California-bound gold seekers. The Dakota first called them Wasatch, which meant godlike. Other tribes had other names, more descriptive. Hat-wearing people, men whose leggings meet in the middle, and hairy mouths. They told the Indian, "We want no more of your land than the width of our axles, and that for no longer than it takes to leave it behind." These would-be millionaires were an amusing curiosity to the Indian. The wagon people tell us about the yellow metal in the shining mountains and how it'll make them rich and big among their people. And then they begged the Indian for food. And another one said, when the sun is not in the sky, they cannot find the trail and they get lost. Then they become angry at the horses. But their horses are lost too. They make me laugh. And one said, the wagon people are very rude. Some of them smell bad. It annoyed the gold rushers that the Indian considered himself lord of his own domain. They are as arrogant as aldermen. It is grinding to be patronized in such lofty manner by these prairie aristos who dress their hair in dog fat and paint their pantaloons on in the morning. As the shining metal seemed to magnetize more and more wagons west, the Indians' curiosity and accommodation gave way to uneasiness. More and more they stopped the wagon trains to parley and asked the same questions they had asked the train preceding it. Why do you keep coming into our country, frightening away our game, setting fire to our grass? Each time you say that your wagon will be the last, and each time a wagon follows you. And each time they would be soothingly assured, there's no cause for alarm. We only want passage across your land, not the land itself. It was a promise the Indian was to hear many times from people who were just passing through. The Plains Indian had once just been passing through himself. Originally a forest dweller and farmer, he had straggled onto the prairie, pushed there from the east by other tribes and European colonizers. Here he had discovered a strange and awesome beast, brought to the New World by Spanish conquistadores, the medicine dog, the horse, and he built a whole new culture around it. Wrote one observer, "Every savage is born with 6 legs, 2 of his own and 4 of his ponies. He only dismounts to dance or to die, but he'd sooner do both on horseback." Unlike most nomads, they bred almost none of their stock themselves, replenishing it by trading and by raiding, nor did they keep horses for meat and milk. Pony eating time was their name for famine. Their staple diet was buffalo meat, and an estimated 60 million bison making up the continental herd was an inexhaustible commissary on the hoof. It also provided the raw material for clothing and shelter and weapons. In fact, most everything the Indian needed had to be mined from the shaggy carcass of the buffalo. Like the Indians, they were inner migrants of the Great Plains. They went where the grass was and followed the seasons around the zodiac. Said a Crow chief, "This is how we live." When the summer heat scorches the prairie in the moon of cherry ripening, we can draw her up under the mountains where the air is sweet and cool, the grass fresh, and the bright streams come tumbling out of the snowbanks. There we can hunt the antelope and the deer when their skins are fit for dressing. There we will find plenty of white bears and mountain sheep. In the autumn, when the yellow leaves come, when our horses are fit and strong from the mountain pastures, we can go down to the plains and hunt the buffalo and the elk, or trap beaver on the streams. And when the cold moon comes, the moon of the frost and the teepee, and the tree-popping moon, we can take shelter on the woody bottoms along the rivers. And there we will find seed and cottonwood bark for our ponies, and buffalo meat for ourselves. The Indian, then, was a nomad. A more advanced civilization called him by another name, vagrant. It was the moon of the birth of the calves and the spring thaws that melted the snow. But the people still saw something white on the prairie. More wagons, more pudding-footed oxen, more white-faced people. A Sioux prophet had said, the Wasatchew are like bees. First one, then the swarm. Pressured out of the east by overpopulation, political unrest, bad debts, bad crops, these were family men now, bringing their families with them. The Indian called their women squaw white men, and generally he was not impressed. One of them said, her face like toothache. Maybe so she bite on green quince. Nor were the emigrants impressed. Expecting Longfellow's Hiawatha, the noble savage, we met instead with starveling beggars. They exact generous gifts in return for our passage, and are indifferent that we carry little that can be spared in our getting there. The Indian had none of the European devotion to the concept of property, but he put an almost holy value on the virtue of generosity. Convinced that the white man's stinginess was based on ignorance, he sought to educate him by stealing what he felt should have been gracefully given. Noted one pioneer, what he wouldn't steal, a hound pup wouldn't pull out of a tan yard. White hot stoves are generally accounted to be safe in their presence. Red hot stoves, however, are not. Resentful of paying tribute and wary of revenge if they didn't, emigrant trains took to corralling in defensive circles. They bolted nervous meals and quieted their fretful children with a new bogeyman. If you don't behave, the Indians will get you. And in the teepee, there was also a new culture frightening. If you don't behave, the Wasatchew will get you. The Indians' love for their children was extravagant. Noted one pioneer, they are hopelessly spoiled. Until the age of 2, they are laced in a cradle board, never out of their mother's sight. She corrects petulance or other naughty behavior by ignoring it. No Indian cub is ever beaten, and they account us as barbaric because we occasionally strike our young. These redskins are raised by example, not precept, for they have no concept of abstract right and wrong. Their children are insatiable in their appetite for admiration and praise. And what passes for character and virtue amongst them stems entirely from this. Childhood was pleasant but short, for they are expected to become adults as quickly as possible. Betrothals were theoretically family arranged, but like everywhere else, the young people often had their own ideas. Sky-treading bird of the prairie, wonderful fawn-eyed one, when you are beside me, my heart sings. A branch it is, dancing, dancing before the wind spirit, in the moon of strawberries. Considering the harsh realities of nomadic life, Indian courtship was surprisingly romantic. A trip to the stream for water could provide countless accidental brief encounters. And for the more bashful suitors, there were more discreet trysts. Nighttime visits to check the pony herd, and whisperings muffled through the dew cloth